printer telling me if we're live or not. Oh, well, I think we are. Hey, welcome to the 2-month review in which we take Ed Park's book, Same Bed, Different Dreams, and break it down bit by bit, section by section for the next 8 weeks. Talk about it, analyze it, have fun, go down all the various rabbit holes. I'm Chad Post from Open Letter Books, joined as always by Brian Wood, author of Joytime Killbox. How you doing, Brian?
I'm doing great. Are we going to start this season with like that's
Here's another season with, well, I don't even know if any of that got captured because the timer that I used to make sure that we're going just came on. So
well, if you've been around for other episodes, we're starting with the same level of professionalism and preparedness as we always do. So yeah,
I would have to argue that we are more prepared. I have an intro bit, I think, that I can get us into this book.
We're basically like a Republican candidate debate. You pretty much know what you're going to get, and you'll probably watch it anyways, just to see, like, yep, that confirms exactly what I thought it was going to be.
What I expected is what's going on.
Yep, that checks out.
There was a lot more variance in these episodes when we did them in the afternoon, where we'd be like, you don't know if that's coffee or beer or a whiskey or whatever.
What are you talking about?
There's episodes, man.
There's still plenty. I'm teaching Monday, Wednesday, Friday this semester, so there's still plenty of variance on a Thursday. So
so much. So yeah. So I there's a weird way into this book, but there's a lot of things that kind of tie together in it. But I want to start by talking about Taylor Swift.
But before you get to Taylor Swift, why, out of all the books we could have done, why did you pick Ed Park's Same Bed, Different Dreams?
So that's
no comma after bed, by the way. It's Same Bed, Different Dreams.
Right. The comma is the book inside of the book. Has the comma in it, which is something that I think we can actually talk about at some point in time.
Let's not get into that yet. Yeah.
No, that's definitely not even for this episode. Because I don't think we know.
I know, like, Ed had a career before this as a with reviews. He also did some.
Taylor Swift part comes in.
Gotcha. Sorry, let me not do that. Why'd you pick this book?
I picked the book because I had read it. I'd gotten a copy of it at Winter Institute back in February of this year.
So you can phone it in and not have to read it too closely. I got it. Okay.
Exactly. I don't have to really know. No, it's kind of the exact opposite. So I came home from Winter Institute and I was excited to have that book because I knew Ed from years past, which we'll maybe talk about. And I've always really, really liked him. Like, I just really like him. And he's like a really good reader, very broad reader, very smart guy, just super nice. And
annoyingly smart.
Annoyingly smart. And I loved his first book, Personal Days. It's very like tricksy and kind of fun and about like sort of an office novel from that period of like when corporations bought out, creative enterprises and then fucked them dry. And I like that book. So this big one all of a sudden is here. I didn't know he was going to be there until like right beforehand. And when I came home, I got COVID. That was when I had my COVID time. So I was just lying in bed most of the time and I couldn't watch TV for some reason. I was like, couldn't find a way to focus. And this book, Reading the Galley, was the only thing I could kind of focus on, mostly because it is so varied. Like the different parts shift and there's different tones to it. And it doesn't follow like just one kind of narrative thread. So like my jumbled ass brain that was like feverish and dream ridden mapped onto it pretty well. And every second of the way I loved it. And I talked to like the U of R about having him come here and give a reading when it came out. But to be honest, like that was all through a COVID cloak. Like my memory of it, even like I went to do the introduction when he read here on Monday, I was like, oh, I remember just a vague thing. I don't remember any specifics very clearly. And then I started looking, I was like, yeah, that's right. I remember that. I remember some recollection, but even after I read it and I knew reading it on COVID was not going to help, I was like, my memory's fucked. I really want to reread this book. And like having read it one time is sort of like, okay, I've got the basis. And then the sort of fun stuff can come on the second reading because there are a lot of like dropped in connections or motifs or echoes, whatever you want to frame it. So that's mainly why. And that it's a book that just came out and has gotten like immense like respect. It's on the New York Times notable 100 books, along with Not Even the Dead by Juan Gomez Barcena and Katie Whittemore. Just plug for Open Letter Books, which are all 30% off right now through January 6th. If you go to our website, you don't even have to use a code. But it's on there. It's on the PW's top 10 list. There's like various booktubers, like this guy that's metafictional meathead is his Instagram handle. It's his book of the year. He loves this. All these people love this book and have really resonated with. So rereading it, I felt like is a good idea. And I think it's something that I think you would like because it's very, the writing is crisp and like concrete and less like bonkers and abstracted. But it also does have a lot of plot lines, which similar to your Vegas book that you talked about, weaving those together and having them bounce off one another and how that's handled in here, I thought might be of interest to you in terms of your novel.
Thanks. So that's just a subtle kick in the ass, like, hurry up, please, get that done.
That? Yeah. I'm gonna write that one.
Yeah.
I told Ed, and this is maybe talking out of school or sharing something, but at the end of Mulligan's Stew, or near the end when I met you for lunch, and you had that drawing of the different components and how you were going to map it, and you said something about how Mulligan's Stew had like broken your way of like framing and structuring things and wanted to like re kind of work parts of it.
Yeah. Just do the work.
Oh, it's all about just giving you stuff.
Yeah. So today, what we're 1 through 70.
1 through 70. It's 3 sections.
3 sections of the 3 different parts
Yeah, exactly. And I think the main one that we'll talk about in this first half is the party scene, because that's the longest section. It's part of the grouping called the sins, and it is features our like main protagonist. And then we'll talk about the Korean Provisional Government stuff at the end. But honestly, I did want to start with Taylor Swift, and not to like shit on Taylor Swift, although my text messages to you and Kaya about how she must be stopped are set aside. But I saw this is all part of like a similar article where the thing that set me off was how she's like, I'm just there to support Travis and he supports me. And it's like, you guys don't need fucking support. You're like mega superstars. Like, give me a break. But there's this line in here, and this is where this comes. So she's talking about how people are complaining that she's showing on the games too much. And she said, I have no awareness if I'm being shown too much and pissing off a few dads, Brads, and Chads. And I feel personally attacked by this. I do watch the football. I have seen her on there. I don't care. I think that it might be not a good reason for young women to start watching football, or young men, or anyone to be like watching a sport that will probably die out with our generation because it's horrifically violent and like brain damaging. But the thing about Taylor Swift and about this whole the whole discussion of it, similar like the Otani discussion, is that there is no alternative. All we have now is mainstream media. And that ties into Ed. So we have there, everyone's going to be pumping the Taylor Swift narrative and Travis Kelce and where Otani is going to sign, which I will keep refreshing my phone throughout this just in case. But there's, because everyone does the same thing. Now the back in the day, did you read alt-weeklies growing up, like in San Francisco or in the Bay Area, any of the free alt-weekly papers?
Yes. Which
one was yours? Was it the?
I think we had one called the Metro, if I recall.
Oh, that seems possible. I'm seeing to East Bay Express. That was one that I remember someone working at, and that was a really good one. This the Bay Guardian too.
Bay Guardian. Okay, yeah, I don't remember the exact names of them, but yeah.
And like in Detroit, they had the Metro Times. These were all over. Portland Mercury. They're like big ones. Every big city had the Chicago Reader, which I think still exists, but they all had these alt-weeklies that were free and they were outside of that mainstream discourse.
They were funky and they were weird and they were opinionated. And like it mentions in here, is one of the things I underlined in here, like talking about missing the days where there wasn't a digital archive of everything. And if you missed it, you missed it.
It was gone. Yeah. And they were like, all supported by, I mean, they're probably partially gone because of Craigslist, but they were mostly supported by really weird classified ads. Sometimes very sexual, like the phone sex lines or more.
Mostly.
And like erotic dating sites, but like, or dating personal ads. But there was the classifieds kept it going. So some of them would be super thick and it'd be like mostly ads. But like under that, there was like journalism being done, like real writers writing real things. In New York, there was the Village Voice, which Ed worked at, which is this kind of segue here. And then the New York Press. And the New York Press was like intentionally like a little bit more like not conservative, but a little bit more like on the independent thinking side of things. It was run by this guy, John Strasbaugh, who's like legendary, famous, really funny, smart guy. And they were intentionally like trying to be more Manhattan and more independent than the Village Voice. It would try and like pick at the Village Voice, like trying to pick on like the bigger sibling, because the Village Voice was everywhere but had like more of a metro Brooklyn-y sort of focus. But these magazines were invaluable to like culture. Like growing up in the Midwest, like when we had like access to them, they would like the Detroit Metro Times, like they had reviews of weird music that you wouldn't find because there's no websites, like the internet didn't exist. So reviews of weird music that wouldn't be in Rolling Stone or Spin, like articles that were like thoughtful and like provocative and op-edy, and lots of stuff about like culture, art shows, jazz shows, books, all that stuff was there. And then in personal days and in Ed's life, he left the Village Voice, but when it got bought, and it got bought by people who like ran Backpage, that like sex trafficking, serial killer playbox. They were the ones that owned the Village Voice and gutted it, and it's gone. And all these places were all bought up by these conglomerates, which brings me back to Taylor Swift. And bear with me here. So those I think were really, really interesting, and I think that they were like thoughtful. There's something that our culture is truly lacking in. We do not have a space for this right now, and don't tell me it's Lit Hub, because I will go on a rant. But
I was just about to say, like, that's what's gone wrong with things, because now because you'd think you could still have all that freedom because there's a digital space where you can explore and do whatever you want and like really push things, but it's almost become more restrictive and less interesting because again, it's the ad revenue.
Yep.
And so you can't be controversial. You can't push anything. You can't stretch a little bit because I don't know if there's like there's almost like there's a corporate template that you have to stay within, like color with this color, this thickness, and I want it packaged like this. And if it's not that, we're not going to do it. And it needs to sound like this, and it needs to feel like this, and politically it needs to align with this, or we're not going to do it. And so it's just this small boxed in. There's nothing interesting there. There's no there.
Right. And they all, because as you mentioned, the ad revenue, a lot of these places run off of clicks. Like the number of clicks that you can get is the number of like how much you can charge for ad revenue. And they're like frequently set up to, bring together, so what I'm looking for, aggregate tons of articles. So like they become essentially content farms. And the one that ties back into Taylor Swift, because this article on Taylor Swift is from Sports Illustrated, was the Sports Illustrated story from that broke last week, where Sports Illustrated it's mostly just online. There's like a monthly magazine that's whatever, but the online stuff is truly a content farm to try and get people to click through Apple News or whatever. And it was discovered that a huge number of their articles were AI generated by AI created figures. So there was no real there. There was no there. It was just designed to like get people to click through by generating the most banal, cobbled together content that was online. Like this Taylor Swift article with these quotes might not have been written by a human being at all. And like we've gone from a world in which there was this thoughtful, like crazed, sort of impulsive assessment of culture through these alt-weeklies to a point where it's like just a content farm of AI saying like there's a great example on Hang Up and Listen where they found that Gannett did this at one point too, got caught, and they had like a AI bot that would write Ohio high school football summaries of games. And it was like 13 of like the 40 articles that it wrote began with, you could call this a close encounter of the athletic kind. That was like the AI's joke, and it was one of the ways that it got found out. But like I feel like this book represents a sort of different place in this too. This will come clear later, but I'm making a little bit of a thematic leap here. But in the sense that like the core of this book is an unpublished translation that is about a secret society. That sort of modality is wonderful and works with like the Pynchon books and like things that sort of tie into that vague line. But it also, I find it very like fun to read about because we don't have anything like that anymore. We have like entirely made up bullshit and like the Democrat and Chronicle here in Rochester, which is not a real paper.
Yeah. I don't know that down in the lobby of the hotel I'm staying at, they have this thing called the Epoch Times, EPOCH. I don't know if you've seen that periodical, but That is fun to read. Let me tell you,
Yeah.
holy shit.
Which religious group is that? Because it comes up. So this comes up again in the book later. I'm not going to give it. This isn't a huge spoiler, but the Moonies, the history of the Moonies is part of this novel, and they're the ones who started the Washington Times, which is also one of these sort of alt-weekly, like alternative papers that, but it has like had like a very specific sort of like funding source behind it.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'll look at it real quick. About Us, Epoch Times. It
It's
says it's real news.
yeah.
Oh gosh, I don't know. This is the picture that comes up when it says About Us, and that just looks like a nightmare. That looks like a nightmare.
That's scary.
That's
I
a
don't
lot
like
of
that
suits.
at all. Those are the Brads and Chads. For anyone listening, is like a group of white dudes that look like car dealers standing around a desk.
I don't know. They're about freedom of speech, freedom of religion, and the pursuit of happiness. Woo! America.
Don't believe
America.
Yeah, that's bullshit. Anyone who says that is not someone you can trust at all. But like it's so we've gone through this weird world. And I think like one of the reasons that going back to wanting to read this book, part of it with Ed too, is that Ed's he's like at the crux of a lot of these things. He was one of the co-founders of The Believer, which I think is, I mean, I haven't seen the most recent relaunch, but has remained one of the more interesting literary magazines.
Oh, when they first came out, I devoured The Believer. That was interesting because there are things that are like, I don't agree with this at all, but this is lovely the way it's written, and it's really challenging the way I think.
So he reminded me,
nothing just challenge. And I don't know if it's like that San Francisco spirit that allows that to take place or not. Like, let your freak flag fly, be weird, whatever. Like be punk, like counterculture, whatever. Like, I don't know if it's that spirit that allowed that to take place or what, or if it's Eggers saying like, I'll throw money at it. Don't worry about it. But it was lovely. And the illustration style and the house style was really cool.
The guy that did a lot of those, his wife went to school here at the U of R in the cultural studies program. She was a grad student there. They live in Syracuse now, and he was like Mark Mulroney. He was a good friend for a while when they were living here. Very cool guy. Does like really weird art, including things with baseball cards and Archie comics. He's very cool, but he was one of the ones that drew a lot of those. He's great. But yeah, it has the right vibe. It has all that stuff. I love to find that spirit, and this book kind of has that spirit to me a little bit.
Which part of the book has that spirit? Because I feel like we obviously we get the three different kind of motifs, or not the right word, but the three different styles.
Yeah.
Which one for you is providing that
particular spark right now, I think, is within in this section that we read, within the Same Bed, Different Dreams section about the Korean Provisional Government, where it's like educational, but also clearly a little off. Like some of the stuff is real, and you can look it up and go through a deep dive of it. And other stuff is like a little bit manipulated to like come to certain points. And there's something about that I find very intriguing. But I think as a whole, like the way that they kind of bounce off one another, and this will be, I think this become more of something to talk about as we go through the book in later episodes. But like the way that it all works together is trying to create something that's a different way of creating a traditional narrative. Because for the most part, that second section, the one that we'll talk about now, about Soon Sheen, who works at a tech company called Gloat. He goes to a book party for a Korean like enfant terrible named Echo. He's going to go by the name Echo, which is also very like Pynchonian and telling in its way. The Soon's daughter is named Story. They have a dog named Sprout. There's a lot of like that kind of name thing going on. But Echo is being published by this press, and he has one novel that's coming out, and then a second one that's supposedly not finished. That's called Same Bed, Different Dreams, which our protagonist Soon somehow finds in his briefcase or his bag on his way home and starts reading. And that is the one that is the third part of the section we had. So we started with 2333 about what is history, and I think we can leave that for later. And then we have the long party scene, and then we get him part of what he reads when he gets home from that manuscript. And I think that like that second part, the party part, is relatively straightforward, conventional sort of writing. Like what you say is like, this is a this is a crafted, well put together novel.
Yeah,
everything works well because it's like spaceless, but yet has like enough elements of like what this restaurant is like to create the ambiance of it. There's like a rambunctiousness to it that I know we talked to Ed, and his interview will be on the audio version of this. And we talked about it a bit, but it is influenced by the recognitions party scenes where like characters sort of pop up, do a little thing, and then are gone. There's not like this continual line, which is something that I've seen in like a few other writers, but like
we talked about that briefly with JR. I think they're called like French scenes where it's just very quick into the scene, out of the scene, boom, boom, without like big grand curtains coming down and up. Like these little like snippets of like passing through. There's a lot of action, a lot of movement.
It's like watching an Altman film.
Yeah. What really impressed me from this first 70 pages, I don't know enough about 2333 to know what its purpose serves just yet. Right. And we will once we get like a set. But it's pretty clear how the sins is going to function and how same bed, different dreams, the dreams is going to function. What I like about it is that you get a different style of writing, and each one is nuanced for what it's doing all at the same time. And so to have that like flexibility and to be pulled in these three different directions as an artist to have something that's stitched together and works, but is also pulling in different directions in order to do that magic trick that's really cool. Really impressive. Yeah,
very, very much so. So you're a fan so far?
So far, yeah. We still plenty of time to lose me though. So
420, 30 pages left for sure. But let's see. Is there a specific thing you want to talk about with relation to the party scene? I have a few things that are marked that I think are like crucial for.
Well, it seems like it's a world that you know really well, right? Because it's like this, like they're there to talk about the book they're putting out. One, it's a really weird publishing house. It's very niche, to say the least.
What is there? 3 interest Malaysian cooking that you can make only in a rice pot. Graphic novels about politics using woodcuts and very strange translated fiction.
Yeah.
Which hits a little close to home.
Yeah, probably hits a little close to home.
Yeah, so this he did tell me the inspiration for this particular scene over dinner after his reading was that at one point in time he was invited by Dan Simon of 7 Stories to go to a literary dinner for one of their Korean authors, whose name is Wang Suk-yoon, I think. I forget what it is exactly. But they had this big Korean author, and so they invited Ed there, and he's like, this party was kind of sparked by that dinner where like it's like the certain literati, everyone's sort of posturing in their own different way. There's also like the kind of, and it is kind of joking and poking fun at that whole publishing scene, but then also within this one, the like Asian American artist.
Well, the sense of humor here is great, right? Because here's a Korean author. Let's go to a Korean restaurant in America. Korean way. Yeah, called like Admiral Yi. Like it's like, oh god, everything's like super cringe about it, right? And then and then there's all the like racial jokes that are sprinkled throughout it, and then just like the artifice of like making it look like it's nautical themed, even though it's not on the water, and then just like just everything about it just being like, what, go ahead.
Oh, Admiral Yi too then ties into Yi Song, the poet that's in the 3rd part too.
Yeah. So I like that, like kind of that like I think it really set the tone of like what kind of book are we going to be getting, and even starting with like what is history, which I thought was really cool, and like even like some of the subtle jokes, like when I believe it was Daisy talks about being in Japan, or I had my nails done in Japan. And then the answer, if I recall, was you only live twice.
Yeah.
Right. Which makes it sound like, hey, you got to live it up while you're there. But I don't know if any of the listeners ever watch any of the Sean Connery, James Bond films, but You Only Live Twice is like one of the most like cringy, racist. I mean, they're all pretty bad and racist, but this one's like, when you rewatch it now, it's like, this is one of those, like, I cannot believe this is still made. It's wonderfully bad at how insensitive it is. like he literally becomes a Japanese man so he can marry a Japanese lady, and like oh my God, it's wonderful how bad it. And so like that line being thrown in there while they're at this, Korean American restaurant for the Korean author, and then the way that the conversations are going, I thought was just what a lovely little like stab by Ed there. That was really good. Really good.
It's amazing. I'm not going to read it all, but this is just the beginning of a paragraph for the Bond film. While attending a sumo tournament.
Yep.
That's all.
Absolutely. What else would you do in Japan?
Yeah. So in terms of characters and placing them, like Soon is very like genuine. He's a former writer, so he ties in our like phrase on former writer sort of vibe. But
everybody likes what he did.
I know, and
everybody remembers what he did.
Everybody remembers what he did, and his age. It seems like to be ages ago within the context of the book. He wrote a short story collection that's like gone, remaindered, barely out there seemingly, and then also some articles where he named
let's not be like, we can be really clever about every single thing about it, but I mean, even that is called Pretenders.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
So does that tell us a little bit about Soon and how he's feeling about? I'm curious if that's going to start like his interactions with this future novel by Echo, if that's going to change Soon in any kind of way.
So I don't want to give anything necessarily away, but there's one note about him in addition to the writing part. So he has those great acronyms. Like I forget like what they all were.
Nervous Asian laugh is one of them, right?
And then there's like the love at first sight.
Yeah.
Laughs. Yeah. And then there was another one that was like unfinished masterpiece, but I can't think of what that one was. But there's a sly reference in here where it talks about not having how he always brings up his wife because he doesn't wear a wedding ring. And he doesn't wear a wedding ring because he doesn't have a ring finger on his left hand.
Yeah, and his wife is a business owner, a very successful business owner of nail salons. So there's kind of that irony there as well. Right.
So that part's key. The publisher Tanner Slow is funny and like over the
press.
top. Slow press, which is wonderful. It sort of like ties into this podcast. And then there's what's her name? The translator. I just blanked.
It wasn't Gemma's in there.
Gemma's his cousin, who's married to the Korean.
She's a model, and then Hans is the husband. Yeah.
But what was the woman who's the translator that he knew from before, who we just mentioned early on, and now I'm blanking on her name.
Because we had Daisy and Monk.
Daisy.
And then, okay.
Yeah, so Daisy is the translator of Echo's books, and they have a past together. And then there's like someone that he had dated, also someone who's like great at brand management. So you've got all the like the components of like that sort of New York cultural lit party right there too, which is fun. But I found the scene. I mean, rereading it this time, it's very entertaining. And then the thing that I think maybe in addition to like anything you want to say about their specific stuff. Like one thing I noticed, I can't find any reference to a T.S. Kim. So on page like 22, it references, they say like, oh, we really liked your piece on your Pull No Punches reappraisal of T.S. Kim's 1985 novel Man in Korean Costume. I wasn't able to find that. And if it does exist and that's true, let me know. Otherwise, I think that's made up. But it comes back and is
look at the last line in that paragraph, right? Back then, you either read something or you missed it forever.
And goes back to exactly what you're saying.
Yeah. That there's no digital archive, right? It's pre-Y2K,
right?
Practically pre-internet. Yeah.
So, and it does reference Paul Rubens' painting sketch depicting a man he saw in Antwerp, clad in a voluminous robe. That shows up over and over again. I could not get anything outside of there. But then some of the other things are really truly true, like when Tanner refers to Soon's book as Alice Munro meets H.H. Munro, H.H. Munro is a real true author who was funny and satirical and wrote with a sense of humor under a name. I think it was, I want to say Saki, but I don't want to be wrong about that. But it's on here somewhere. Yeah, Saki, S-A-K-I. He's an American writer and had tons and tons of short stories. So some of it's real and some of it might not be completely true and could be fabricated. Now the other, like the main event, aside from them like kind of mingling, and he meets the author, he's gets this, ends up getting with the book references.
He's got a case of gums right now, though, right? The Sins is good, but he's got a case of the gums. Great unfinished masterpiece. Yeah.
Great unfinished masterpiece.
Syndrome.
And they refer to it as a novel in 3 novels. And that's what they keep referring to it as, which is also the book that we're holding. So as a synecdoche or a little whatever that would be, like as a sort of way of reading the whole thing.
But even in self-referencing the book that we're holding in our hands, it says brilliant, right? Like there's still that kind of like, wry humor happening here as well.
Yeah, it's like it's not overdone. It's very subtle. So like, I know it gets a lot of Pynchon references this book has so far for, I think, that expansiveness and some of the names. But the Pynchon jokes are so large generally. They're so cartoonish and like writ on the page to be jokes. And a lot of this is like in that subtlety and in the sort of land, like the atmosphere of it. Now, when they're there, they do play a game in which you roll I don't know how to pronounce it, but it's a dice with 14 sides. 6 are flat and 8 are triangles, or 6 are squares, and 8 are triangles. And when it comes up to roll, each one of these little sides has a Chinese character on it. And when it comes to one of those characters, whoever rolled it has to perform whatever that says. So one of them is like dance with no music, sing a song or recite a poem, drink 3 shots, like anything. And then soon gets the one that's like, tell us a secret.
Yeah.
I think something basically like that. And and that's when he like essentially blacks out.
It's just redacted.
Yeah, redacted.
Later, waiting for the train, we just skip right to there. Yeah.
It's like I don't really remember what he said. I don't remember what I said. The whole scene starts to take on like a almost ominous vibe, and when he thinks back on it too, find that section really quick. That to me is like horrifying. Like I'd be like, man, I'm sorry I said some really stupid shit that I should not have said. Like there's not a chance that I'm at a drinking party and you had me tell a secret and it doesn't come out as something that like nobody should be dealing with. So here's the paragraph on 39. My mind fixated on the game at the Admiral Yi. What had I said when the jury told me to, quote, reveal secret things? I remember time stopping as I spoke, the looks on their faces, appalled, amused. My exact words had slipped away. At some point, Daisy patted my arm as Monk or Yuko rubbed my shoulders, trying to comfort me or hold me back. So there's that element of like, you're not that sinister, but like there's something there that's of interest.
I find it interesting too, because in some ways it echoes what we're about to get with this idea of same bed being a hidden history of Korea. Yeah. Right. And then and just now we have a hidden history in Soon's,
our character.
Wow, it's almost like that was on purpose.
Probably. I wonder about that. So,
like we said, kind of annoyingly smart. This Ed Park guy. I don't know about this. Yeah.
It was. This isn't to the like. He really did put together a lot of time on this too, and like.
Oh no!
He said it took him 9 years to write. So being able to like layer in like specific things like that is really. It's very noticeable, but it reminds me of I think I may have told this joke on here before, but Harvey Picar. We were talking about Harvey because I hooked Harvey Picar up with Ed to write a review for the Village Voice, and then Harvey, because Harvey was a little bit crazy, called like way too many times, and ended up Ed being like, Chad, can you tell Harvey to like cool it? But Harvey would call me every week, and he would go on these long rants about whatever. But one of them that I remember specifically was a Pynchon rant. He's like, this guy, it was like, I think it was when when Against the Day was going to come out. And he's like, this guy, people think this motherfucker is so goddamn smart. He takes like 20 years to write a fucking book and then names the capital of North Dakota. And everyone's like, oh my God, what a genius. It's like he took 20 years to go to the library and look at a map. On the internet. But very true. I don't know if there's anything else from the party scene that's like necessary to like cover here. It's a good one. I mean, gloat's probably going to become more important later on.
Sure.
Oh,
well, also like if you look at like this idea of again, this kind of echoes again, right? Like how the little bit we get of Korea in here in the next part, where it's time to modernize. Like the old ways need to die and something new needs to take its place, or that kind of thing that's happening. Right. And then if you look at Sun's career, like he typed his book on a typewriter, right? And then there's no digital archive, and now he's at this like technologically whatever gloat thingy-majig. Like his history is completely changed from the old ways to embracing the new ways and being like, man, I kind of miss the old. I kind of miss the.
Yeah, there was that's interesting too. And in terms of like the caesura where he like doesn't like explain what he says at that point in time, there was this was in one of there are like 3 main reviews of this book: the LA Times, New York Times, and the Washington Post. In one of them, when I was reading to do the introduction, it referenced the fact that our book, the full book, Same Bed, Different Dreams, has no punctuation, but inside the book it's same bed, comma, different dreams, as if that comma could represent the sort of bifurcation of Korea as a whole, or like into the two sides, 2 states. And that caesura does that too. And what you're saying does that too. He's like writing typewriter, then transitions to this other thing, but they're like there's a space between them or a gap of some sorts. That's held apart. But I don't know if there's anything else. Like Echo's the bit describing him is pretty funny. Like it seems like an outrageous like caricature of a wild like Welbeckian author.
We've got the next hot thing. Just yeah, kind of like
a little bit, but yeah. Then there's like blah 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 blah.
Well, how often are there these authors? Well, there's the joke. He's the next Rumi.
yeah. Like name and like Rumi is like who's that?
But no, like there's always going to be some there's not enough room for many of them, but there's always going to be a couple of authors where like they're like this tidal wave, and like you can ride the tidal wave for a little bit, but then it's just like gone, and then on to the next one, right? Like, like maybe they do have something great, but like there's only enough room for like a good author, or like a good book.
I was actually thinking about
that. But no, there's so many good authors and there's so many good books. You have to put all the attention onto one or just a couple. Like you can't spread it too thin, right?
Yeah. And that's because
and it's like each publisher picks who's the one they're going to push. Like that's going to be our, and like, yeah, we love all these other books. We love all these other authors, but like, yeah, screw you guys. Like,
yeah,
sorry. We don't have time for you now, dear. We're going to do this one right now. Like,
but those other books represent the content farm of like getting enough things out there to be able to get enough to be able to do X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
I was thinking about that last night, actually, in terms of a post, which is the post is about the problem with doing posts, but of like things I'd like to do with 3%. And one of them was to look at the second book to people who are much hyped for their debut. Like I had very specific examples in mind of people who like, and I don't even know that some of them have a second book, but they were like all the rage for the moment. And you're like, okay, what's next? And like, it's been 7-8 years. And I wonder, and like, Ed sort of, I suppose, falls into that category, but like this, I think as that example is like really well done. And I don't think that the other ones won't be necessarily, but I'm just curious about it as like, the hype machine exists. And then is it just that one thing?
Yeah. But I kind of feel like in some ways, like
Echo has that pressure on you.
No, but Echo has that feeling of that type of artist, right? Where it's even like just changing the name to just like to a 4-letter word, and
and I like too that like he does fit into that like all the rumors that cannot be true sort of thing. He's drunk all the time, impregnated 100 women, banned in North Korea, jail, like all the like the crazy stories. And it's one of those things where if people said it, you just neither confirm nor deny. Neither confirm nor deny what actually happened. But Anyway, so enough of the party section, which ends with him getting on the Metro North, which is a grand train. His dog's kill is right around the point where I was on the Metro North just a couple weeks ago when I went to New York. So get that place quite well. The next section, the last part, is we get Dream 1, 1905 through 1937, in which we're introduced to a number of real life writers and people that were part of the Korean diaspora and the Korean Provisional Government, which was founded in 1919 with the explicit sort of or stated goal of like pushing back against Japanese occupation of Korea and establishing like an independent and free Korea. So some of the people like I mentioned here are like Syngman Rhee, who's the first president of this and who goes on to be one of the I think prime minister is the correct term for South Korea, or for Korea at a point in time. Then there is the poet Yi Sang, who Ed talked about, and has a poem in here that is bizarre because it's like numbers written backwards.
Numbers with
the dots in the middle, and it's like a poem in statement only. There's also a reference to where to go.
Wasn't he dying of tuberculosis?
Yeah, they all seem to die of tuberculosis.
Which I found was interesting because they talked about him being like, the first, quote, modern poet.
He's the first,
for Korea.
Maybe conflating him with the other person too. So
okay.
Yi Sang is like one of the big poets.
I might have that wrong.
Yeah, well, close. But 50 is section 11. These are all numbered sections. 11 is Yi Kwang-soo, the exile, and it says Yi Kwang-soo is Korea's first modern writer.
Yeah, sorry.
The Korean Provisional Government. He helps write their sort of declaration, blah, 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 blah. Now, he is a real author. And not only is he a real author, but his book, The Soil, which is about this fat, is published by Delki Archive as part of the Korean library series. So seeing his name even the first time around, I was like, that's really familiar. And then I like Google, and I was like, oh, that's The Soil guy. I've looked at that book a million times. It's like a big fat, like historical novel from 1932, I believe, somewhere around there. So he's introduced. We get like Na Ungyu. I'm not sure how to say that. Who is
whatever it is, you nailed it. It's perfect.
Yeah, totally perfect. No notes. Always. Who's referred to as the locust, and he gets caught for his charges for his role in the March 1st movement. And what role, he wonders? They say he made a movie and must relinquish the film, but a movie didn't do anything like that. So they have a secret document that the Korean police, or the Japanese police, I suppose, would like to acquire. So that shows up. But we get just like a series of these, and it's like almost hard to keep track of who's who. Like, and it flips back and forth between a couple of them, specifically that Na, and then also Yi Kwang-soo. Those two kind of flips back and forth, and we get their sort of stories going along. And then Syngman Rhee, who comes to America, gets involved with like Woodrow Wilson, thinks Woodrow Wilson's going to help make for a free Korea, and Wilson's just like not interested, does not really take him up on that at all. So so you get like this layout of all these people who are part of like what truly was a real organization.
I really like the way the way that flipped with the like promise of being in America and what is possible, and then the reality of going back, and then, hey, remember me? Like letters come back, or like nothing's answered. Goes to Paris and are not received, like physically not received. So I really liked that, how succinct and like great that juxtaposition was of those two things. That's really cool.
Yeah. Absolutely. There are a couple of things in here that I think are worth really pointing out. One is that the Yi Sang, the poet who dies at 26, which is twice 13, as it mentions. And he's the crazy poet who like the police, encounter him, and they're like, isn't it true you published a similar poem in 1931 in Japanese, only with the numbers printed normally? And Yi Sang nods. The police say, why? And he shrugs and says, did the straight line murder the circle? Like he's got like those kind of like weird quippy sort of things. And then his section ends with saying like he did have ulterior motives. He wanted to pierce the heart of Japan. That's why he went to Tokyo. He needed to get close enough to stab it with incantations. Yet other more potent poems never published, thousands of works that no sane mind could contemplate. The Japanese destroy his papers without even a glance. Yi Sang dies at 26, twice 13, an undercover operative for the Korean Provisional Government. So that is stated very declaratively in like that he was. And part of his poetry that's referenced earlier is that people go mad when they read it. And that ties into like that's just so crazy. They're like, this is, you know, making our minds explode. And Syngman retells like a crazy like story, like a what do you call it? Like a myth of like how Korea was formed. And that comes from a book called The Wonders, which could be translated as, it says, this makes the Samguk
Dreams.
What's that?
Dreams.
And then that book is described, so it has like lots of these tales, all this kind of crazy stuff. It's like stories left out of the official history of the three kingdoms. It's all these different parables, visions, strange stuff. And then the line that I think is like the thesis for this book is on the top of 63. The book lacks all proportion. The heroic, the whimsical, and the grotesque all get equal billing. And I think that that's sort of like a good like sort of thread for what could be coming as well, in terms of maybe not like lacks all proportion sounds negative, but I think in the sense of like it includes whatever. And like this history includes like all these different moving pieces and these parts. It does not completely refine. And when we had the conversation with Ed, and you can hear this on the audio version, which will be available on Friday, December 8th, wherever you get your podcast, primarily Apple and Spotify, he does talk about putting in so much stuff and the things he pulled out and things he didn't end up including. He told me a story before you got there about a scene that included a movie that James Dean and Ronald Reagan were in. It was a show. It was like an anthology show, and they're in one show together. And he was writing about that and then decided just not to include it. But he like was willing to like throw anything in here that made sense to be in here. And that kind of feels like this, you know, this mythological, not mythological, but like myth-making, fable-esque sort of like book that exists that they're all kind of drawing from.
Yeah, good start to the season. I'm really curious to get back to the 2333 to see what that is and how it fits. And so I'm really excited for that. Yeah. Oh,
me too. I am very much without saying anything more than that.
Do we agree the correct is 2333, just like 2666?
That's how he said it. That's how he said it. So,
well, if Ed said it, it is done.
Yep, exactly. There we go. So did you have any other final thoughts or a quote that you particularly liked?
Yeah, I've got my line for the day, line of the week, primed and ready to go. It's on page 19.
Okay.
So they're talking about books and stuff. And he talks about his first book, Pretenders. Pretenders was a rarefied creation, unavailable outside the U.S. and more often than not, unavailable inside the U.S. as well.
I love that line. I marked that too. Mine, because I'm a juvenile, is on 66, which it would have been better if it was somewhere else. But it says in real life, it's talking about Yi Sang's novel. It says in real life, Yi Sang and Gum, his wife, opened a tea house together called Swallow. Its street number is 69. And that's where we're at with this right now. So for next week, we go up to page 155. We'll probably have, and that will take us through one more set of all three sections. So we get extradition to Gambrinus, 1966, which is a longer 2333 thing. So that might make it possible to discuss that in more detail next time. And then the sins, that takes place in August, and then a section on Same Bed, Different Dreams, which covers, which years is this? 1901 through 1909. So back in time. Very cool, man. And for anyone who's listening, wherever you are, you can subscribe. If you're watching us live, hit the subscribe button, like us, give us a thumbs up. You can always follow us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, where you can subscribe and rate the podcast. That really helps out with people being able to discover stuff in this AI generated content farm. How many of these podcasts that are out there are AI generated? I wonder, in this world. So if you like real people, do that. You can follow us on Twitter at 2 Month Review, Brian Wood _, which I know you don't use, and Chad W Post, which I barely use. And Otherwise, you got anything? Stay tuned if you're listening to the audio, because you'll have an interview with Ed Park coming up next. And I have nothing else. You got anything, Brian?
Nope. Just gonna swallow some more coffee.
No, pick up your phone. I think I know who's calling. Wish I could tell you what I wished for. Looked at the moon, pressed sex at the star. Wish I could tell you what I wished for. Looked at the moon, pressed sex at the star.
And now we are joined by Ed Park. Ed, thanks for coming on.
Hey, thanks so much for having me, guys.
Yeah, of course, of course. So we've just theoretically talked about the first 70 pages of the book, but we don't need to do that. Ed, do you want to, let's start with some easy questions. Do you want to talk for a second about how you came to write this book?
Sure. I had written a book that was published back in 2008 called Personal Days, and I don't know, life kind of caught up with me. I had a son, I was working, I was teaching, I was writing reviews and stuff. I had another kid, and then I was kind of in publishing for a while, and so I was very busy with life, and doing a little bit of writing, fiction writing around the edges, some short stories when I was inspired, but there came a time where I couldn't, I wanted to do something bigger, I guess. And I had finished writing these stories, or I'd sort of brought these stories together as a collection. And this was around 2014. And I think I just had this energy, this kind of unconscious drive to write something else, something new. And what happened was I wrote what's basically, it's now the second chapter of Same Bed, Different Dreams. It's a big party scene. It's kind of a literary satire. There's a character who's kind of like me, but then again, there's about a dozen characters. They're all kind of like reflections of me, which I hopefully have made funny and absurd.
Oh yeah.
There's a lot of like literary talk and stuff. Anyway, I wrote that chapter, and it was kind of like I was inviting myself to a kind of a very fun, gossipy dinner party. And at some point I realized this isn't a short story. This is the start of something. When you pass that like 30, 40 page mark, you're like, well, this is something else. So you'll notice when there are like some cliffhangers, like there are a couple things that happen toward the end of that scene that I didn't know. It would take me years to figure out what those things were, but I just I must have put them there with the knowledge, like this is what's going to make the novel continue. Like we want the reader's going to want to find out what those things mean.
That was one thing I did want to ask you, is that the book has so many connective threads, and like things that pop up hundreds of pages apart. And I mean, one of the characters in that first scene is Echo, so there are like, put not a fine point on, but there are echoes of things throughout the rest of the book. How did you keep track of all that? Or did you just feel it intuitively, or did you really track it?
At some, on some level you feel it, but then after a certain number of pages, when you're 100, 200 pages in, you've got to track this stuff, and that can get really, it gets obviously really complex, and with Personal Days, which is a much smaller book and a much shorter cast of characters, I actually use like an Excel spreadsheet just to track like, when did this character appear, just so like people could get the name straight, and like even certain objects. I didn't use an Excel sheet for this, but I did. I would often map out stuff like visually, so like on a big piece of paper, like a name of someone here, a connective line. I did that constantly. I would periodically type up summaries of what I'd written and like boldface, keep an eye on the Zippo lighter or whatever. They're like certain objects even that I needed to like trace through the book. So there was a lot of that, and which it's very necessary, especially for a book this size. But there are times where it's clarifying, because you're like, we don't need all this stuff. Like, let's take out the stuff that's not working. Like, you don't have to put like this many objects or this many characters. And in fact, that first dinner scene that I mentioned, I think originally there were 14 distinct characters.
Wow.
And I trimmed it a bit because I realized like a couple of them they could just be melded into, they weren't kind of, I invited them to the dinner, but they weren't like earning their keep or whatever. They were not, they were kind of a little too quiet or but I had these names which I might use for a different book.
Oh yeah, of course.
Some good names.
Which character's gluten free again? Oh
Yeah.
no, I gotta go to my notes here. Yeah.
That would have been good actually. Yeah.
That's a scene that that this is sort of cheating, but that's the recognitions
Definitely.
influence scene, right? Who else was an influence on you in writing this book?
Well, so William Gaddis's The Recognitions, probably more so than his other novels, which I also like. That book took me forever to read, and this was like in the, I guess, early mid '90s. I also had the Reader's Guide to the Recognitions, which like the hardcover, which I found at I think at Barnard Book Forum. It was like on the reject table, and I was like, I'll buy this. And so that was like a real adventure. But just actually, the Reader's Guide also was just kind of a fascinating document because it's sort of a deconstructed version of the book, right? And so Moore is tracing certain things that maybe Gaddis is not making explicit. Anyway, there are party scenes in that book that are just wonderful and hilarious, and like people weave in and out, like they're kind of on stage to say something funny, and then you don't see them for many pages. So I would say the Recognitions, not just for the party scenes, but the other one for the party scenes would be Anthony Pohl's Dance to the Music of Time, which talk about party scenes. These are like the best party scenes.
I'm gonna read that whole thing next year,
good.
Month by month, because I read like 4 volumes or four of the novels like 15, 20 years ago.
Yeah. I mean, it's weird. Like, it's probably my favorite book, but I'm also like, it doesn't really kick in until volume 3, and it's like, okay, I'll read 300 pages. I mean, I think the first ones are great, but like number 3, The Acceptance World, is like, that's when the weirdness comes in, and it's really, really good. But he has these, he just plunges you into these party scenes, and kind of at every level of society. Like, he's kind of seen as this snob or Tory or whatever, but his books are really like, just in terms of a cross section with enormous sympathy of all kind of levels of English society. I think they're kind of fascinating. I'd also mention his book, his first novel, Afternoon Men, also great party scenes, and that's maybe even a more direct influence. Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. The other person that comes to mind is Henry Green.
I like Henry Green. I've only read Living, but you know that they knew each other as kids, right? They were both at the same boarding school, and they would regale. Can you imagine? They were like 8 years old, regaling the other kids who were whatever, I don't know what school, like this British school. Everybody's in their bunks, and these two guys are like spinning stories from them. So they were like lifelong, friends from a very tender age. Yeah,
that makes sense.
But stylistically completely different.
Right. Oh, that's very interesting.
Maybe to go back a little bit further, what went wrong in your life where you decided you want to be a writer? What happened?
I don't know. I think it's what went right.
Oh, okay.
I think it was the kind of thing that felt like, I don't know how to describe it. I mean, like all of us, I love to read. Yeah. It felt like,
Did you start as like a voracious reader first?
I think so, yeah. And actually, my cousin Andy, who's not a writer, he was an even more voracious reader, and so, we were kind of a well-stocked local public library, and just reading everything, right? Reading, like going through a whole series of. Do you remember those biographies of like, Betsy Ross, George Washington Carver? Like there's like really those kind of illustrated, like. You read all of those. You read all of Beverly Clear. You just kind of go. You clear out shelf after shelf. Read all the Peanuts books, and then but at a certain point you notice like these Stephen King paperbacks, and what is they had like the original Philip K. Dick Ubik, on the shelf, and so
the spray paint.
Yes, exactly. The spray paint can. Like, what is this? So a lot of sort of living in the library and going to Walden Books, which is the main bookstore in the mall, and I guess it must have been in high school, like just starting to write I mean, what's interesting is like, you have classes, and I don't think there was necessarily at that age a creative writing class per se, but there was like a literary magazine, and it's like,
Yeah.
I just found myself writing stories, and it
Mhm.
felt like you're just doing it out of what pure enjoyment of these writers. You kind of want to emulate that a bit, and so that's kind of where that clicked. And I took a couple creative writing classes in college. Two of them. One is called Daily Themes, with the poet John Hollander taught it.
Oh,
It's a big
wow.
lecture hall, and I sort of poked fun of it in the section I read the other
Yeah.
day, where there's a daily themes like class where you have to do a different kind of technique every single day.
Yeah.
Like that was the whole point of Daily Themes. And in the book I joke like it made the character never want to be a writer. but I found it really like great. First of all, daily, like you're writing every day,
Yep.
and that is the best kind of thing to get in your head as a writer.
That's what blogs were really good for.
Yeah,
Is
definitely.
like you have to write, if you write every day, otherwise you lose everything.
You lose the momentum, and I've been conscious of that. I mean, people sometimes say, "Oh, it took you 15 years for this book to come out. Did you have writer's block?" But I didn't have writer's block. I've never had writer's block. I've worked on projects that failed. Like there are a couple. We don't have to get into this, but a couple like abandoned novels behind this one and behind Personal Days as well. But it's not for lack of wanting to write. Like I'm constantly writing. But I guess at some point you realize I don't know, like kind of the academic track wasn't really for me, and I wasn't really interested in law school. I lived in Korea for a bit after college, and then I came back. I went to Columbia for my MFA. Like I was one of the younger people at that point. And then I worked at the Village Voice for many years. But one of the reasons I started working there, I got a job as a copy editor, and I had already begun to sort of organize my life around, fiction writing. And basically you got the weekends, but obviously you obviously got the weekends, but the paper would go to bed on Monday nights. So Tuesdays, you either wouldn't have to come in or you could come in super late because there wasn't that much activity. So that was my extra bonus day of writing. So I was working on my first novel, which is not published. It doesn't exist except on my shelf. That's what I would do. I mean, I was kind of a weird guy, weird, somewhat solitary person, but there is something about writing. There were at least 2 mega novels before Personal Days. Personal Days is quite slim, but those other 2 books were around this length.
Oh my God.
They were I was pouring everything I could into them. But if that, it's one of those things where you're on the path and you feel like I've done all this work. I don't want to turn back.
I Don't Want to Date You was Columbia. Was Spillman there when you were?
I don't think so. We might have just missed each other.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, I'm just curious because I'm really interested in your publishing background.
Yeah.
Because I know you're kind of wearing 2 hats being a publisher. It's really probably difficult to. I'm more of a writer. He's more of a publisher, obviously. But
it's. I mean,
how does that work? I mean,
it doesn't work that well sometimes.
Yeah. I'm trying to imagine. I'm like, there's no way.
It's definitely some of the inspiration for Same Bed Different Dreams grew out of working in publishing.
Yeah.
Which I no longer do. I finally had to leave, partly to finish this book because it was under contract. I had there's a whole long saga, but I wanted to finish it. I was hundreds of pages deep, and writing whenever I could, writing before work, writing after work, and realizing I needed to just focus on this, or else it's not gonna it's not gonna come out well. And I also wanted to. I mean, as a publisher, you want to do right by your authors, so I didn't want to have that kind of divided loyalty, if that makes sense.
Sure.
So, anyway, had to have the talk with my wife, and she was very supportive. And I did do a fair amount of freelance writing and stuff just to kind of keep my hand in. But
because you wrote a lot of a regular column on graphic novels and on science or speculative fiction.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
The speculative fiction stuff came that was kind of right before and after Personal Days.
Oh,
Although
okay,
it went on
okay.
for a long time,
Yeah.
and it was every month, and it was like
Yeah.
not that much money. The graphic novels, that happened after I left Penguin Press, where I'd been working, and that was a little, it was every other month.
Oh.
My co-columnist Hilary Shute did the other month,
Right.
and the dirty secret with graphic novels is you can actually read them quite quickly,
Oh,
like
yeah.
twice. So, and it was just a thousand words. So there's always plenty to say. And I've always loved graphic novels, graphic memoirs. I don't think that affects my writing style in any way, but it was fun to just sort of think about them and write about them.
Oh, yeah, of
for a
course.
couple years. Yeah.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Did you, with the kind of 3 different kind of sections
Yeah.
of this book, with like the sins, and then with the 2333,
Yeah.
however you pronounce that,
Yeah.
which feels like a reference to
Of
2666.
course. Definitely is a reference.
2,666.
And 2666. There are all the various ways to say it.
Yeah.
As we played with when we did that for this podcast. Did you like stick with writing one of those for multiple spaces and then intersperse it, or would you jump back and forth?
So that's a really good question. I'll try to be succinct. I was writing this, kind of the sins, which is the party scene that I mentioned. That was the original kind of novel for hundreds and hundreds of pages. Actually, for
Okay.
very,
Yeah.
and there was a whole other conception of the book which I won't get into. But I basically had a huge amount of this storyline. Soon Sheen, the narrator. So it's all in first person. Some of it is retrospective, but there was actually a cut scene later on in the book, like chapter 7 or something, which was another big party scene where all these other characters. So it's kind of like I was going on, and I realized at a certain point, like the novel was getting longer, but not necessarily better. And I had this revelation upon reading a book that came out in 2019 called Big Bang by David Bowman. It was a posthumous novel. Jonathan Lethem edited it, and I had read Bowman's book Let the Dog Drive back in the 90s, which I really loved. It's like just this great, like very strange little funny first novel. But I kind of lost track of Bowman, and he died prematurely, I think. But Big Bang was this incredible, like, magnum opus. No real narrator, but this really addictive voice that was like, we're going to give you all of like mid-century American culture at every level.
Wow.
It's going to be gossipy. They're going to be like bold-faced names, but we're going to make it really interesting. All the coincidences, all the sort of strange interactions. Anyway, I knew Bowman's name. I read the book. I actually read it on NetGalley, so I never got but it was one of those books that you never want to end. Like, I didn't know how long it was, and it's actually quite a long book, but I was just like, I love this so much. And it got me thinking about Korean history and how, well, could something like this be done with sort of modern Korean history, which is what I'm most interested in. So that would be kind of the increasing control Japan had over it, leading to colonization, protest, end of World War II, and the kind of seeds of the Korean War, stuff like that. And I think part of it was like to have a Korean American narrator in The Sins, this guy Soon Sheen, who's kind of like me in some ways. How much do I have to explain about what is Korean American and what is Korea? Because I think most people don't know, and there's a reason why the Korean War, which is incredibly brutal, that it's called the Forgotten War, right? So people know there was a war. They don't really know what happened. People had, the book took so long that like things like K-drama and K-pop actually rose to the surface. But when I started, it wasn't really as familiar. So part of what I was doing, inspired by Big Bang to some degree, was like writing this kind of a text about Korean history, but with making it exciting, making it entertaining, and just stuffing all the kind of cool stuff I've read about over the years. And it was sort of like notes for a while, like, I don't know what I'm doing, and maybe I'm playing hooky from the other book. Right. And then I realized, no, this is the novel within the novel, which I'd set up already. And then I kind of like demolished the sins, the kind of the urtext. I was like, take the 6 chapters you like the best, throw out the rest, don't even think about it anymore. Just take the most entertaining, the funniest, the weirdest chapters, and those are going to be your chapters, and then you're going to put these other historical sections in between, and those became called the dreams of the Korean Provisional Government, Dream 1, Dream 2, etc. Okay, so I had those two things kind of in tandem. And then I was mostly writing the dreams because I could kind of see like how each dream would unfold.
Uh-huh.
And then at a certain point, God help me, I was like, this actually needs a third strand because I can't just bounce between these two. And you know, the 2333 is the third strand, and it's, I don't know how to describe it except that it changes the voice and the decade with each installment.
Yeah.
So that's kind of woven through as well. And there's, I guess that has some purely fictional characters and a lot more like Buffalo in it.
Yes.
I think it's just a screensaver.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Should be all good.
Okay.
That's really interesting because that's very cool too. The Buffalo stuff is fun. It's
Oh,
fun
I'm
for
glad you
being
like it.
here, like
Yeah.
clearly in Rochester, so
Right.
it sort of resonates. But
Yeah.
it is very fun.
Well, there's a lot of Buffalo Sabres in it, and I know that the Americans are here, right? The
Yeah.
Rochester Americans, yes.
Amherst.
The Amherst, right?
I don't know how that came to be the name, but
Why not?
yeah, sure.
Yeah, so it was a good opportunity to. Also, I feel like the longer you work on a book, the more your deepest obsessions work their way in. So the Sabres were clearly, had to, because I've been thinking about them all my life, and
Yeah.
I'm old enough that I can still remember these like moments from their glory days, but just also from the 70s, like their past, and it was fun to work that in.
I have one more just quick question.
Yeah.
I know we're getting low on time.
Yeah.
With you having both, the publishing side of things,
Yeah.
the writing side of things, when you were pitching your novel, how would obviously it's complex, it's interweaved, it's weird, it's strange. How did you what was the bouillon cube that you gave to pitch the novel? Like how did you sell it basically?
Well, it kind of piggybacked on this story collection. So I told you I was like in 2014. I was kind of assembling because I'd written a lot of stories, and I was just like, which ones are the best? I wrote some new ones. I thought maybe this could sell, and so we went back to Random House where my Personal Days was published. Totally new author, new editor rather, and editor who's no longer there, Noah Eaker, bought the story collection, but also this partial novel. So I've obviously never done this before, but the contract was for the novel to be completed first.
Yeah, of course.
Oh,
And so
okay.
it was great, obviously, but it was also like the pressure is on. And I think, my initial sort of idea for the book was kind of like, a satirical novel, much more kind of Korean stuff in it, but I didn't realize how deep it would go. And I think that's sort of, I mean, it has a happy ending clearly, but in terms of I finished the book and it's out.
Yeah,
but
yeah,
there are definitely moments where you're like, what is this book? Like it's not just this a comedy. I'm actually trying to deal with large parts of Korean history and how tragic a lot of that is and how it melds with American history. And that's why later in the book you get kind of names that a lot of Americans will recognize, and just like what was Marilyn Monroe's connection to Korea? What was anyway, I don't want to spoilers, but the assassinations and sort of as a Buffalonian, I knew about William McKinley's assassination in Buffalo, but what about the two other assassinations like right around that time by Koreans involving Korea? So that was kind of like the novel was not what they thought it was ultimately, but I think they were very good about especially after Noah left. There's no rush. I was communicating with my agent PJ Mark, who was the agent for Personal Days. So he was like a really good not just a sounding board, but just trying to figure out how do we now give this back to Random House as this mega novel, but it all worked out. So.
That's very cool. I do have a question related to Korea.
Are
There Korean authors, Korean books that you think you'd like to like recommend that people should read or should know about?
Of course. I think a lot of people have read The Vegetarian,
which we passed on.
Hong Kong. I mean, it's a fascinating book, and anyone who wants it's like kind of a crazy book, and a kind of startling feminist text, and quite surreal. There's a book that came out that Dalkey published called At Least We Can Apologize, by a writer named Lee Ki-ho, who I think of that series that they did, that was sort of the one that spoke to me the most. It was the funniest. The black humor was incredible. It reminded me a little bit of Agatha Christoph's The Notebook, because it's like two sort of, it's not in a first person plural, but it's like these two kind of marginalized figures, like trying to figure out what is going on. They work at a sock factory. They're kind of like imprisoned. They're like kind of mental patients. But I love that book, and I wish more people would read it. And then going back in history, there's Teresa Hakyung Cha's Dictée from the early 80s, Richard E. Kim's The Martyred from the 60s. He was an interesting guy. He had been in Korea, landed in America, and then wound up going to Iowa, and sort of had a couple books out here. And then even further back, the first Korean American novelist, Young Hil Kong, The Grass Roof, and then one of my favorite books, just full stop, East Goes West, which is a remarkable comedy of an immigrant comedy, but also just like a really fully formed, deep, and hilarious book.
That's great. We have a triptych of 3 Korean books coming out.
Oh, wonderful.
In early next year. Ha Sang-nan, the short story writer. I'll give you one on the way.
Okay, great.
Her book Wafers, and then Kan Young-suk's Rina, which was done by Dalkey as part of that series.
Oh, nice.
It's like another feminist, postmodern, strange text. And then Year After Year by Wang Young-yoon. I'm not sure I'm saying that correct.
Okay.
But she had a couple books come out from Tilted Access, and we're doing 2 more over here.
Yeah.
But yeah, we've had a lot of, I really love the Korean.
You guys have done Besua, right?
Yep.
Yeah. I would also say that's
why we chose that instead of Han.
Oh, okay.
Han. That was essentially.
But didn't Debra Smith did? Yeah. I also just shout out to that Dalkey series. Like, I haven't read them all, but there are some extraordinary books in there. Yeah,
there really are, and like those are slowly but surely going to come out with like new covers.
But seriously, like At Least We Can Apologize. That should have like a blinged out cover with like, I reviewed it in the New Yorker, and there should be like a huge like New Yorker thing on the front.
Or you can write an intro.
I did an interview when I met Lee Ki-ho when I was in Korea in 2015 or something, and then we did an interview. It's got a great. It's called Straight Outta Gangwon.
Oh wow!
Because he was inspired by rap, and it's a great. We did it over email, but that was in Korean Literature Today.
Oh, it was. Okay.
Yeah, it's like he was.
It's probably on their website.
Great. Anyway, I think he's a fantastic writer. He has a second novel called something about Second Sons. It's much more like Korea political specific. My dad read it. I gave it to my dad. He thought it was really great.
Interesting.
Somebody should bring it out here. So
I'm looking into that.
Anyway,
I
think he's kind of the most exciting Korean author. Yeah.
That's great. I still have to read that, but I have it on my shelf. I'm going to bring it up for Christmas.
See what you think.
The only other thing I wanted to ask you, and then we can get going, is so there is another Same Bed, Different Dreams. That is a Korean drama, right?
It is a Korean reality show.
Oh,
but this book took so long to write that. So my title actually precedes that, and there's a This American Life episode, which it also precedes. But just briefly on the title, my dad had written it to me in an email. It's a Korean saying, but it's actually like a Pan-Asian saying. Like, it's people in China, Taiwan will recognize it. But it's such a great, those 4 words, like, it says so much. Same bed, different dreams. Like, you never know what your partner, your spouse is thinking. Like, as close as you are to someone, everybody's got something else going on in their mind. And so the title stuck with me. I tried writing like kind of a proto novel, I think about a filmmaker using that title. Like it just, I always knew I wanted to use that as a title, and I'm so happy that I finally did. and that they even have the title in Korean on the cover of my hardcover. And this is actually not the kind of the traditional. I'm going to mangle it. So the traditional way of writing it in Korean is also just it's 4 syllables. This one is but it's more like kind of Chinese based, and I think this is a more Korean, a little bit more unusual, but according to my dad, more tantalizing. Like kind of leaves things like on a mysterious note. So I like that. Yeah.
Have you watched the reality show?
I don't know that it's readily available. I think I saw some clips on YouTube, but it's I think it's actually about parenting. Like I don't quite get it, but it's also it's been through a couple seasons, so I think it is quite popular there. Yeah. Interesting.
I'm going to check it out because one of my students was like Google this, and he's like, "Is there this TV show?" And I was like, "No." He's like, "It's right under there." Brian, do you have anything else you want to add or jump in with?
No, I've heard plenty from Ed. I don't
need
anything else from him.
Let's set some limits here. But.
Well, thank you again for coming here, both to the University of Rochester to give the reading last night, and then for talking to us today. And
thank you guys so much. It's a real pleasure.
And we're gonna be plowing on. So for next week, I think it goes up to page 155. Whatever. Well, it'll be in the main part of the podcast, which, to be honest, we've yet to record, so you can see behind the scenes. But
awesome.
Anyways, thanks everyone. Subscribe, like, do all those kind of fun things, and we'll be back next week with more on Same Bed, Different Dreams and Ed Park.
I'll take you to the city.